Yes, I do, but I want to see.
Best time right now,
10. It's 10 so far.
Actually, yeah, we got
11. It's 11.
Tēnā tātou katoa.
Gilda.
We seek wisdom, understanding, insights into the views and circumstances of others, strength to seek what we believe in, humility to accept the combined decisions of others, patience, good humour at all times, tolerance and courtesy, while working in the best interests of our community. Welcome councillors and welcome members of the public. Can I just acknowledge that it's Councillor Linda Cooper's birthday today. Happy birthday, Linda.
Happy birthday.
We don't generally have a rendition of the song, but
we
can hum it quietly to ourselves.
How many claps?
25. You'll get very tired hands.
Right. Apologies. I've received apologies from Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore away on public business. Do I have any other apologies? Oh, I do have, yes. I think Wayne's here. Did I see Wayne somewhere? Yes. Wayne is here.
Do you want me to move something?
No, I just didn't want to give your apologies in your presence. And we have Councillor Efeso Collins for lateness. Are there any other apologies? Otherwise, I'll move that we accept those apologies. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Filipina. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Declarations of interest. Is there any councillor that has any potential conflict of interest with any items on the agenda today? If not, we move on to the confirmation of minutes. We have two sets of minutes from the 19th of April and from our extraordinary meeting of the governing body on the 30th of April.
Happy to move, Mr. Chair.
Okay, moved by Councillor Wayne Walker and seconded by Councillor Desley Simpson. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. We have no petitions today. We have no requests for public input. We have one request for the local board input. Is Kath here? Kath. I'm going to suggest that you speak just before item 11 so that it ties your comments together with the item that you wish to comment on. So I'll ask you and John to come up at that point. Extraordinary items, no indication of any extraordinary items. Notice of motion, no notices of motion. That brings us to item 10 on our agenda, which is Local Electoral Matters Bill and the potential trialling of online voting. And if I could, I don't have to ask, she's done it already, Marguerite Delbay to come to the end of the table to introduce this paper. Welcome, Marguerite.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, councillors. Always a pleasure to be with you. So I've got a quick presentation to take you through the key elements of today's paper, just to give you a little bit of background and hopefully make it easier for you to understand the landscape. So really today we've got, we're asking you to make two main decisions. The first one is to approve Auckland Council's submission to the Justice Select Committee on the Local Electoral Matters Bill, and then the second one is to support in principle Auckland Council running an online voting trial at the 2019 elections, subject to some conditions being met, and I will explain to you what I mean by this. In terms of a bit of background, Auckland Council has been supporting online voting and advocating for it since 2010. And we've been involved in the various working parties that have been happening to try and make it happen. Voter participation is declining. You've heard me in this space saying it quite a lot, and especially among young voters. And we are really at risk of losing a whole generation of voters if we don't make voting a little bit easier. And while online voting is not the panacea, and there needs to be different measures, certainly voting with papers when a lot of young people have never posted a letter these days is it's a must, really. the public wants it, and we did some research at the end of the 2016 elections, and 74% of Aucklanders told us they would prefer to be able to vote online. Online voting improves accessibility. The disability communities has been advocating for it quite a lot, but also, we've got migrants in Auckland, and the ability to make the system available in different languages to make it easier to vote is something that we could do with online voting. People want to be able to do things online. The internet is part of our life, and actually Auckland Council has set itself a target of 70% of our services being available in a digital form by 2019, so that would be part of it. And most importantly, the postal system is declining. And by 2025, we're not sure that we'll have a postal system that will enable us to run an election. So that gives us 2 elections to get ready to be able to vote online. And we don't really have any other alternative to the postal system but to go online. Booth voting is pretty much a no-go zone for local elections, and we would see a bigger decline. And then finally, other countries are already doing it and doing it successfully. So it's not like we are going to be at the forefront of a major breakthrough. Other countries have shown us that it's possible. So and it's interesting to note that the Local Electoral Act, which was enacted in 2001, already has provisions to allow for electronic voting. But it allows it for all electors in a district. That means that if we were going to run it for Auckland Council, it would be all eligible voters, so not a subset of electors. And the second thing is it needs to be enabled by regulations, and those regulations haven't been made yet, so that's why it hasn't been possible. But a local government was worked together in 2013 to try and get a trial underway, and Auckland was excluded because we were deemed to be too big to fail. And the government at the time saw that 30% or 33% of all electors in New Zealand for a trial was too big. So we couldn't take part, and the trial was ultimately cancelled. But we have continued to push the government to enable a trial. And this government has responded by proposing the Local Electoral Matters Bill. And I think it's important to note that, in effect, this bill is for us. And what I mean by that is a trial could still happen without Auckland Council, with those councils that would trial it for all the electors. But with this bill, which in itself is not necessary, it enables Auckland Council to take part. So that's really I really want to emphasize that how much grateful we should be for the government listening to give us that opportunity. So what does the Local Electoral Matters Bill do? Well, it is an omnibus bill, and it amends 2 acts, the Local Electoral Act 2001 and the Electoral Act 1993, to enable online voting trials to happen, to allow the use of date of birth information to identify voters. So that's one way that voters could identify themselves when they log into the system, and to enable access to voter age information to evaluate the effectiveness of a trial. So basically, access to statistics. What it doesn't do is open the door to online voting on an ongoing basis. It's only for trials. And just to note that there would also need to be changes to the regulations to give effect to the bill. So the submission that we have written strongly supports the bill and makes a recommendation with regards to access to voter information, that we also have access to whether people are from Māori descent. And that's because they have that information on the roll. When you register on the electoral roll, you are being asked whether you're Māori descent to be put on the Māori roll. We cannot ask for other ethnic information just because it's not available. That's not information that is being asked when you register. And then I took the opportunity to reiterate the desire for Auckland Council to see changes to legislation so that we are able to change the number of governing body numbers, and we are able to modify local board boundaries to maintain alignment with wards with the approval of the relevant local board. This is something we've been advocating for as part and you considered it when you looked at the review of representation arrangements. It was in the first part of the bill, and the minister removed it for political reasons just before the bill was introduced. But what I'm doing here is taking the opportunity of the submission to reiterate the fact that we would like to see that happen. Whether it will in effect, I'm not holding high hopes. And then finally, it signals that we would welcome the opportunity to appear in front of the Select Committee. So the second part is seeking your approval in principle for a trial. And my proposal would be that we run a trial with a subset of electors, which would be about 75,000 people. And this would be disabled people, especially vision impaired people, overseas voters, which is about 20,000. And then we would choose a ward or local board area, so on average about 50,000 voters based on a set of criteria yet to be determined. And that would give us a nice subset of electors. So the conditions, and my strong preference would be that we form an alliance or a club with other councils to do one trial for the whole of New Zealand for those councils who are interested, just because we need to put our forces together and our money together rather than to scatter our efforts. So the four conditions of your in-principle support would be that the legislation and regulations are passed on time, that all the relevant risks are properly managed and mitigated, obviously the cost being acceptable, and I would come back to you with a much firmer proposal on whether to proceed or not once we've done the work. At the moment, I'm a little bit in a catch-22 position where I can't tell you how much it's going to cost until I've engaged with vendors, and I can't engage with vendors until I know that you want us to do this. So it's hence the support in principle. And just to note here that I would look at working quite closely with New South Wales, who has had a lot of experience and is now on their third election running an online system, and they've done it very successfully. So in terms of next steps, once I get your in-principle approval, we would approach other councils to work together, and we would enter into arrangements either together as councils or through a third party and a commercial partner, and we run a selection process. We would work with DIA and sector partners to make sure that the regulations are passed on time. And then we'd get on our bike and start pedaling pretty damn quickly, because there's a lot to do and not a lot of time to do it. So time would certainly be of the essence. So that's the context, and I'm, of course, very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Marguerite, not only for a very clear submission today, but for all of the work that you've put into this over a very long time, including with Local Government New Zealand. Look, I'm happy to move this to get it on the table, seconded by Councillor Chris Darby. There are three parts to the recommendations: the approval of the submission, the support in principle for online voting, and we have discussed that before, so it probably doesn't require an extended discussion, but that's up to councillors. But the other point is to appoint a member of the governing body to make this representation to the Select Committee. And I've had an approach from Councillor Richard Hills, who might epitomise that online voting is the expectation of the up-and-coming generation, but it's open to anybody else to nominate as well. But Richard has signalled his indication that he would be prepared to present the submission to the Select Committee, which I would be happy about. So if we can just begin with questions, can I just, one question to clarify, Marguerite, when you say one trial, that's one trial on a standard system, but it could be in a number of different local board areas, or one trial in one area?
Well, we could do anything we want. My recommendation is not to go too big, and that's...
Oh, sorry, no, let me clarify my question. Not just when you say one trial, were you imagining that if you're working in collaboration with other local councils, but the trial would take place over a number of councils?
Yes,
is that what you had in mind?
Sorry, yes. So the collaboration would be to procure a system, and we would procure one system that we would all use, and then run it in our respective areas. So say the 8 councils that are currently interested in running an online voting trial, and you've got Wellington, Matamata, Piako, Hamilton, Marlborough, Selwyn, Palmerston North, Gisborne and Tararua. So we would all work together, purchase one system or one solution, and that solution would be available for the selected electors in each of those areas. The alternative is that councils go it alone, so each of us go and purchase a solution separately, and that to me is not the way to go. It would, because if one of us fails, we all fail,
Yep.
and plus we are basically our purchasing power will be much better if we just club together.
And the second question, if we run one system across a number of councils, how does that affect the projected cost of perhaps $1 to $1.5 million? Does that brings it down, presumably?
Yes. So I mean, the more partners we have, the more we're able to spread the costs. Yeah. And the question of how we would spread the costs is yet to be defined, but I would imagine that it would be on the basis of the number of eligible electors would be one thing. Another factor to consider is how many permutations you have to build to give the opportunity to these electors to vote. And, you know, for Auckland Council as a whole, we've got more than 100 different permutations that we need to build for everybody to have, to be able to vote. So it would be the same for different electorates.
Okay, other questions, councillors? Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Marguerite, for bringing this. Time it is. Just question on the proposals for those that might be targeted with a trial and how you've arrived at those categories of the visually impaired, overseas voters, and then a geographic grouping. I note that there's some feedback from the disability panel, and maybe that's where the visually impaired has come from. But I'm very aware that there's low voter turnout, young people, minority ethnic groups, yep, and the less educated. They are the 3 groups, from my reading, that don't vote like the majority seem to vote. So can you just give us some idea of why you're arriving at those categories when maybe the research says we already know where the low voters reside, so why would we not target what the research is already telling us?
Mm. So those categories have been the ones that have traditionally been used in other trials, just because they're relatively sort of easy to put your arms around if you want. But if we do get the ability to use date of birth through that bill, we could very well look at making it available to anybody, say, younger than 30, for the sake of example. So, and that's, to be honest, that's not something I had thought of, but we could definitely look at that. So certainly more thought can be given as to what those subcategories would be. It needs to be practical in terms of targeting, but it's certainly not set in stone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman.
Marguerite, so I'm quite agnostic on this one, but the cohort of voters where we have the highest level of participation are the oldest voters. and on the basis that we have an online voting option which is complementary to postal. That's what you're proposing?
Yes, it
Yep.
is.
So do you have any expectation of any sort of switch in voting methodology across the cohort where we already have a high level of participation? I get what Councillor Darby is saying, but what I want to do is to ensure that we don't start to lose those voters that already do participate because they are confused about there's a new way of voting. The postal's still there, but you know we're encouraging people to do it online, where people aren't necessarily participating in online transactions. So, is there any sort of information there, or it's just basically it's going to be an option for them, and they can pick and choose? And we would anticipate that most of those voters in particular would probably stick with postal.
I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers just with me here, but when we did that survey after the 2016 elections, we did look by age group at who told us they would prefer to vote online. And from memory, it was certainly more than 50%. I think from memory it was 60% of people towards the sort of the older cohorts were still indicated that they would prefer to vote online. So.
Okay.
I think the perception that older people might not want to use the system is not necessarily true. But obviously, we would need to be very clear about the fact that voting online is an option, but that they can continue to use paper if they want to. And indeed, it would be an important one because we would need to ensure that people don't vote twice.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Kathy Casey.
A comment and a question, Marguerite. First of all, you're welcome to use Albert Eden Roskill as your trial place because we have one of the most diverse communities in Auckland. And number two, I'd just like you to outline a wee bit more the statement you made in here that says there are vocal international anti-online voting activists who will actively seek to undermine the project. Just tell me what you think that, what that actually means on the ground.
Page is that?
It's on page 12. Halfway down.
So what we are seeing internationally is there is a group of people who are very vocal about saying that voting online is not secure, and that we shouldn't use it. And every time there is an online voting either trial or election happening, they do get very vocal in the media and on the internet, saying you shouldn't, trying to discredit it. Now, no IT system is 100% secure. The banking system is not. The census was not 100% secure. It's a fallacy to think that we can make it 100% secure. But there's also a lot of systems that are being used every day to do some very sensitive transactions that are working successfully. And so it's all about how you build the security of your system to start up with, and then how you just watch what risks are happening and how you mitigate them when they happen. But if you talk to New South Wales, basically, every time they do something about online voting, you will find naysayers in the media telling you that this is not a good idea and it shouldn't be done. So it's a matter of really being transparent and clear and working with all the different stakeholders to take them on the journey with us and actually reassure them that we're doing everything we can to make the system secure, and involving them and actually listening to the concerns that they have, because that's helpful to build the resilience and the security of the system.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. A particular concern that I'd put to you is if there's some form of online voting, effectively you've got a whole nother medium that we're dealing with, and there are a whole range of costs associated with how you promote that, how you engage with that in order for online to be successful. At the same time, we know that there are a number more things that we could be doing to encourage postal voting, and what I would describe as a more interactive presence, that is human to human, rather than through some form of electronic medium. So my concern is that if we don't allocate the money and the resource and the smart thinking to both, we may well suffer an overall decline. And that is against a background globally because of the Trump effect and a whole lot of things going on, where there is a great deal of suspicion around manipulation and the impact of how electronic marketing and media can be manipulated. And there's increasing information around that. So I really want to be assured that in any trial that we're not going to downsize the postal presence and the interactive engagement that we're seeing less and less of in our society.
So you're right, Councillor Walker. I mean, online voting is not the panacea that's going to make people suddenly go back to voting. And there needs to be a whole series of initiatives to encourage participation. That is one of them, alongside of the community engagement and participation initiatives that we will design for the campaign. And just generally speaking, explaining to people why it's important for them to vote and how their vote can make a difference, which is all about educating them about what councils do and how they touch their lives. So it's certainly not an either or, and the overall campaign would have to take into consideration online voting alongside all the other initiatives to promote participation.
Sure. Just a related context in terms of the online space. I think the experience generally is the online space is just becoming increasingly crowded. There's just so much information. There are so many things that call on somebody's online time in terms of distractions that unless we're actually applying quite some resource, we're going to have problems because we can't compete with Amazon and all sorts of other operations that increasingly are moving into the online space in New Zealand. So I just put that. Okay, I'll just go on to another
Sorry, Councillor,
question.
can you make it a question, please, because we're still a question
Sure.
rather than
so
comment.
Another question then, in terms of online, are we talking about, not just laptop, but smartphone? So there's an opportunity there and apps that make it easy?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hills.
Yes, thank you, Marguerite. I'm obviously supportive of the online voting component. Are we talking about the rest of the submission yet, or after the...
Yep, the whole submission.
Okay, so I'm pretty happy with all the other recommendations, apart from I still have concerns around the one about if someone quits within 12 months of an election, how that works. Because on paper it sounds good. Yes, we save $100,000 on a by-election, yada yada, but if, and obviously people know my politics around here, but say Desley quit 3 weeks or 2 months or 3 months after the election, Orake would have a Green Party councillor. And not saying that that's a good or a bad thing. Not saying it's a good or a bad thing, but that a very only a small amount of that community wanted that Green Party councillor.
Yeah, so it's not
it would
democratic.
still cross the threshold of 20% of the winning candidate, but would that, I would just worry what it could throw up. I mean, maybe in the local board space where the votes are quite close quite often, but sometimes in a local, in the wards for councillors, you could get quite a different councillor that has not got very wide support of the community, and I would just be concerned, it could happen in the south on the opposite way, or the west, or, whatever, but
So we don't have opposite.
Okay.
you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
so I get the sentiment of it, but I do wonder what that means to that community. They'll have 2 years where where 90% of the community did not want that person as their councillor or whatever.
Okay, so there is, it's a little bit confusing in that you've got in your agenda a covering paper that sort of gives you the recommendation, an appendix which is a submission on the bill, and an appendix to that appendix which is our 2016 submission to the then Select Committee on the inquiry of the 2016 elections, which never happened. So what you're referring to is in that 2016 submission, which we've appended to the current submission that we're making. And the reason why I've appended it is because I just wanted to show the Select Committee that online voting has been on Auckland Council's mind for quite some time. But I am not in the submission on this local electoral matters bill suggesting any other changes to the bill in its current form that we're in that submission. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it was just because the agenda, the item was called
I know,
amendment and local
attachment,
voting. So
yes,
I was like, which? Okay, no, that's fine.
It's confusing.
So that's just information only, basically.
Yeah.
It's not. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, no, thank you for clearing that up. Councillor Lee.
Thank you. Starting at the beginning, may I again respectfully request that when we send these documents off to Parliament, that in regard to the mihi, which appears to be obligatory, that we have a mihi that is somewhat less boastful than the one that proclaims Auckland the envy of thousands, famed among the multitude, unique in the world, etc., etc., etc. You know, let's have some emotional intelligence and recognise the real politics of New Zealand. People outside of Auckland don't like that stuff. It's all right for us to tell us how good we are, but believe me, if we want to win the hearts and minds of people in Parliament and the Wellington bureaucracy, let's have something a little bit more modest and less, to use the Maori word, whakahihi. So I'll make that point. Now, in regard to the electronic or online voting, I was in a discussion with a leading authority on local government IT some time ago, when he pointed out to me that ensuring non-violation of the system is almost impossible given the technology available. And I'm surprised that there's less sort of acknowledgement of the kerfuffle going on in America and to some extent Europe right now about alleged outside interference or Russian meddling. There's no, while the USA is in complete uproar over this, there's never been any suggestion of the vote count being meddled with, but because physically it can't be. But if it was online, there's every possibility of meddling from any source. So I'm just concerned that we don't recognise or put due weight on the need for security to protect the sanctity, if you like, of this process. No, doesn't appear to be any acknowledgement at all. And with all due respect, Estonia is probably not the best model for democracy for New Zealand. This country needs no example from any country in Europe how to conduct democracy. And Estonia is very, very new to democracy, to be frank. And so I wouldn't put too many eggs in the Estonian electoral basket. One final point, and that relates to ensure fair representation of the governing body's wards. I certainly agree with this. I note that my own ward is mentioned here, that the variance is 43%. Please be aware that a large number of that exceedance are people who are non-residents, who are people who are here to study, tourists, temporary staying, whatever. A large number of those people are completely outside the body politics. So that is why, probably not the popularity of the councillor, that is why that ward exceeds the norm by so much. And I think we need to understand that if we're talking about a democratic process, we are talking about a democratic process, and therefore to factor people who are not involved in the democratic process is probably something of an oversight. Nevertheless, we do need to correct that problem, and the one available to us under the Mr. Hyde's Act, I don't think is fair or sustainable, and completely unbalances the relationship between local boards and the ward councillor. In other words, the long-standing communities of interest, or the communities of interest that we are trying to strengthen under the Auckland Council. So I certainly support a request to Parliament to tweak that part of the Local Government Auckland Council Amendment Acts. Just in terms of
Councillor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we are asking questions at this stage, and I think you've moved on to making comment.
Okay,
on
I apologise for that. I have.
But I did ascertain a question about security that you might like to address, Marguerite.
There's something about Estonia there too.
And the Mihi.
There is absolutely no doubt that we would not run a trial if we were not satisfied that the security requirements can be met, and the ensuring the integrity of the voting system is absolutely paramount. And this is why I put one of the conditions in your in-principle support is that all risks, including security risk, are being appropriately managed. But I would be the first one to stand in front of you and say, let's pull the plug because we're not sure that the security can be met. As I said at the beginning, no IT or online system is ever 100% secure, but it is about how you build it, and you build security, resilience, and responses around it that gives you that level of comfort that we can go ahead. And that's what we would have to make sure that we're comfortable with.
Councillor Sharon Stewart.
Thank you. I've got a little bit of what Desley had. Okay. Thank you. Just on the voting online, one of the questions that you said that perhaps your birth certificate would be something that you'd have to put online. What about proof of where you reside? Because that's another thing. I know in some countries that there has been a lot of fraud picked up from online voting because they've then been able to find that the person's not actually residing at the place that they've said that they were residing at. So, it opens up a big can of worms.
So basically your question relates to what we would use to authenticate people. And there are different ways, and that's one of the decisions that we will have to make if we decide to run a trial. So everybody will get their voting paper in the post anyway. And so one channel to get one identifier would be a number on their voting paper. And then there needs to be a second identifier. And that could be your date of birth. So that's what the bill is making possible. It doesn't mean it must, but that would be one thing that would be able to use. Or we may actually decide to be more secure that we ask people to pre-register so that they have to actually put some credentials with an own password online beforehand, which is what a banking system, for instance, asks you to do when you've got a two-step process where you first need to register. You get a confirmation email. It does give you another code, and you would use this code plus the code that you've got on your voting paper to then go and vote online. So the whole authentication process is part of the work that we would need to do to decide how to do it securely. But all that the bill does is give us date of birth as one possible method if we so choose.
Just one other question. The New South Wales, it is compulsory over there, isn't it?
It is compulsory to vote, yes.
What happens if they don't vote?
I think you get fined.
$55. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you. My question is, we're talking about loss and interfering in electronic voting. Do we have any figures on how many postal envelopes are lying on the ground, getting taken by other people and filled in? You know, I mean, even I know in families, people go, oh, I fill it out for everyone in my family, you know. So do we have any data? I don't imagine we do, but do we have any data about that kind of tampering or loss through the postal system?
No, we don't, and that's one of the major weaknesses.
Or people have moved, yeah.
That's one of the major weaknesses of the current system is that system is not 100% secure either. And as you have pointed out, there can be tampering, there can be loss. I mean, there was that famous case in the last election of a whole bag of mail that had been dumped by a postie. So all of this happens. And actually, if you compare the security of on postal voting versus online voting, the security levels of an online voting are actually much higher.
Yeah, so I can reserve my right to speak, or I can just do it now, whatever you like.
I think we'll come back to
Okay,
it.
good.
Maybe you could.
Put my name down.
I think your point's very clear and a good one. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Marguerite, you mentioned the survey that was conducted. Was that survey conducted in areas where a high population of Pacific people were, or are?
Yes, the sample was representative, so representative of the demographics of Auckland.
And so with the survey that was done, were the age a condition? Because when I say condition, with the age, because I know, and I have no doubt that Councillor Collins is the same, around our older people, because you mentioned during your presentation that access to computers where our older communities, especially Pacific, don't have access to it. So was the survey conducted with people that are over 65 or anything else, or was it just Pacific community?
No, so the whole survey sample was representative of the communities of Auckland in terms of age, in terms of ethnic background, in terms of geographical location. But we did, so the samples were not big enough to give us a breakdown by ethnicity, but we certainly have the breakdown for that questions of what would be your preferred way of voting. Online was 75% overall. It was in the 90% for the younger age groups, and it was still over 50%. I think from memory, 60% for the older age groups.
Okay, and last question, and I will speak when we end up speaking on the substantive, Your Worship. My last question is recommendation 5 of the attachment, which is on page 15. You've got Auckland Council recommends, and there's two parts. One is around the number of governing body members, and the part 2 is around amended to provide process to restore alignment between ward and local board boundaries. That second part, does that allow the ward boundaries to be changed? For example, having that split into 2 local board areas and having,
So from a representation arrangements perspective, the Local Electoral Act gives you the ability to change the ward boundaries to meet the requirements of representations. And that's the plus minus 10% rule, where you're basically trying to have an equal number of voters per elected position. So that's your representation review process that enables you to change those wards. That representation review process does not give you the ability to change local board boundaries. If you want to change local board boundaries, you need to go through a completely different process, which is called a reorganization proposal, which you submit to the local government commission.
Yep.
So what we're finding, and I'll be back in a couple of months with a proposal for the review of representation arrangements, is given the way population has grown in Auckland, we end up having a very big misalignment between local board boundaries and ward boundaries. And what we're proposing here is an easier system whereby the local board boundaries could be amended to stay in line with the ward boundaries without having to go through a full reorganization proposal. And obviously that would be with the agreement of the relevant local board. So that's a discussion that we had when we considered the review of representation arrangements, and at the time that was the recommendation that the governing body asked for. So what I'm doing here is reiterating to the government through the select committee, hey, remember, we asked for that. So it's an electoral matter, so it's relevant to a local matters electoral bill, but it's just to make the point that Auckland Council has been trying to make to the government that we want that change to happen.
Okay. And sorry, Your Worship, Marguerite, with the working group, was there a discussion that took place around the Manukau ward and the ability to end up splitting the Manukau ward into the local board? So we had, and I've got the average across Tāmaki Makaurau, I've got the average around population per councillor. But was there discussion around the Manukau ward being spread into 2 local board areas? So we had a councillor for each of those. And if it was, what was the result of the discussion? And I have a supplementary to your answer.
So yes, the governance working party did discuss whether there was merit in splitting those wards that have more than one elected member, and we looked in particular at splitting them along the lines of the local boards. So the only ward where it would make sense to do so was the Manukau ward. We looked at it for Albert Eden and it didn't work, and we looked at it for I think Manuera Papakura, it didn't work. So in Waitemata, no, because Waitemata does have only one councillor.
Yeah.
But so in any case, yes, it was considered by the working party, and in the end, the working party decided to retain the status quo because there was no particular reason to do it for the Manukau ward and not, other than, yes, we could do it. But, I mean, that's certainly something we can revisit if you've got some very strong feelings about it. The overarching principle for the representation review that the working party agreed is that we would only seek change where absolutely necessary and try not to tamper with the overall representation arrangements when it wasn't.
So my supplementary, Your Worship, is how now do we end up putting in the submission the ability, with the information that I've received, the ability to split the Manukau ward, and I've spoken to my fellow councillor and also the local board chairs. So what process is there, and Marguerite, might be to you, or what process is available for that to happen in the submission?
This has nothing to do with the submission. The ability to split the ward is an ability that exists in the Local Electoral Act at the moment. What this is talking about is the ability to align to change the local board areas to align with the wards if we wanted to. So the ward boundaries and the change of ward boundaries is considered under the representation review. The legislation already enables that. This is not what this is asking.
Thank you.
What
Councillor Greg
process is
Sayers.
available. Sorry.
Sorry,
I know they're questions, Your Worship. It's just I know. Well, look, I'll wait for my speaking turn, and then I'll put the argument in front of the councillors around here.
yeah. I think the important answer that you got, Councillor, was that this submission doesn't deal specifically with that issue.
Sure,
That
yes,
right to split a ward already exists. This is simply about realigning a ward with the local board area. That's.
Got-
But you could
Yeah,
refer to
yeah,
that in your comment
I'll
if
do
you
that
feel
when
the
I
need
speak.
to. Councillor Greg Sayers?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I have two questions, Your Worship, and two from my fellow councillor here, if I'm able to indulge you to ask those questions through me, Your Worship. It's no voice. I've just got them written beside me.
I'd charge a commission though.
All right. Well, thank you for that indulgence. So, Marguerite, two questions, and it's really picking up on the points that Alf's just made, Councillor, and Councillor Darby, and around one, definitely, we need to lift participation rates, and particularly with the youth and our ethnic minority groups. So, I'm supportive of this recommendation, but I'd just like to flesh out these two questions. So I heard you say that we really want to target through this trial increasing participation, and would probably target a group of 75,000 people, visually impaired, overseas, and a geographical selection to try and make up that sample size. So just with regard to that geographical area, would we be trying to target those areas that had high density areas of young people, and those areas where there are good representation of those ethnic minority groups in terms of the area we chose? And probably the second question is probably related, Your Worship, so I'll ask at the same time.
Sure.
Rather than perhaps putting a whole ward, so you might choose a ward as a geographical area or a local board area, is there a possibility, because a lot of those wards have subdivisions within them, so could you target, well, look, we'd like to see our response, the pickup in those groups, in that subdivision, and kind of spread the risk a little bit as well, but also targeting those key people we want to target, Marguerite. So that's really my question. Is there ability to do that?
Well, the answer is yes. We could, so more generally, I think your question is what criteria will we use to choose that area or those areas? And that's work that we still need to do. So Councillor Darby suggested it could be by age. We could look at a criteria where we want to award, as you said, which is lots of younger voter, or we could look at accessibility, or where the postal system might be working less well. But so the option of taking a local board area, say you take the Rodney local board area, for example, and have one subdivision of the local board being able to vote online versus the other not being able to vote online, and see whether that would have an impact on turnout, is certainly something we could do. So we haven't come up with a definite list of criteria to choose that area or those areas, but that's certainly one consideration we could take.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you for that answer, because I would hope that we might pick different subdivisions within wards to get a representative sample. And Your Worship, the questions from Councillor Simpson. Do we know how the online census results compared to the firmer hard copy census?
So this was the first time that the census was basically mainly online. So it was not you can do it online or on paper, is do it online and only do it on paper if there's a very good reason why you can't access the system online. So it was online first for the first time. I don't know if I've got the percentages in
over 3.5 million in the first week.
Yeah, but it was overwhelmingly people filled it online because that was the major way to do it.
Do you think a supplementary to that? No, okay. And the second question, So it seems like you're perhaps asking us to vote in principle today without us knowing all the specifics around the security and authenticity. So when would we have to actually make the final decision on this?
So the very first question I will have to ask the IA after this meeting today is when can we expect to have the bill enacted, and when would we expect to get the regulations enacted? And we'll need to work out a timeline, depending on when that is, to see whether we can actually purchase a solution on time to meet all the requirements. And so that timeline still needs to be drawn. But we, if by the end of the year we're not well underway, it will be too late. I mean, as it happens, it's already not a lot of time at all. So I can't give you an exact date at the moment, but we certainly would do it at a point where, we would need to commit significant amounts of money, and it would be a go, no-go at that stage.
Can I just emphasise that what we're asked to do today is give support in principle, and before any trial would go ahead, it will come back to the governing body for approval. So the things that we don't have answers on at the moment, we would have answers on by the time we gave a final check-off or decline to do so.
Your Worship, if I may, so just to answer Councillor Hill's and Councillor Filipina's questions, I've got the survey breakdown here. So the question was, what would be your preferred way of voting? In 18 to 24-year-olds was 85% in favour of online voting, 25 to 34, 78%, 35 to 44, 80%, 45 to 54, 74%, 55 to 64, 70%, and 65 years plus, 55%.
Great, thank you very much. We've still got 3 questions to go, at least, and we've taken an hour over this, but it's an important issue. Councillor John Watson.
Yeah, thank you. And I've just got a very simple, straightforward question. Obviously, this is all designed to try and increase voter turnout, and in particular young voters. Marguerite, could you just remind us why the turnout for national elections is virtually double that of local body elections, and where people have to physically go, in most part, to a single location on a single day to register their vote? So why is there, what does the research tell us why there's just such that massive gulf in voting turnout?
I don't know if research tells us, among the different reasons are the fact that, it is postal and not booth voting. There is less understanding among the public about what their local body does compared to a national election, which is, I think, much better canvassed publicly. It's quite a lot more complicated. You actually have up to 7 choices to make between the mayor, the councillors, and if you're in a ward that has more than a councillors, your local board, your DHB, your licensing trust. Traditionally the turnout has been lower, but postal voting for local body elections was introduced 20 or 25 years ago to try and help boost voter turnout, because booth voting was going down a lot, and it did.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think there's a number of very salient points here, and I'll reserve my right to speak to them.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Hills.
Yeah, so sorry, I thought we were supporting in principle and then trusting you for the rest. So it is coming back to us for a final vote.
C4 of the recommendations indicates that.
All right, sorry. The other question I had was, and I do worry, I understand the security, but I do worry that we become a little bit overzealous on the who are you, where are you from, because we don't do that in central government booth voting. You can walk in, and I support that. You don't have to show ID, you don't have to prove who you are. It's just very illegal if you vote for someone else, but we don't, because it can be a huge barrier for people, the people we're trying to get to. The other thing is, we don't know if people are voting who they are on the postage as well. So anyone can pull anyone's thing up their letterbox if they do, or someone can vote for the whole household or whatever. So there is no proof that whoever voted on those apart from the trust. So I understand the security of hacking and all that sort of thing, but I would hate for us to add more barriers just because it's online and it has a facade of being, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrible, everyone's going to be voting for. I would hate for us to be, birth certificates, date of birth, addresses, whatever, but then we will lose all the people we're trying to target, just like you would if we forced everyone to show their ID when they walk through the door on election day. So I just want to be clear that you'll be working and we'll be working on, especially if it's the future way to vote, that we don't end up putting up voter ID barriers to every person who votes.
So you're right, it's a happy medium between a secure system and a system that is easy to use. Just to clarify, there is no mention of birth certificate anywhere, so that's not on the table. It's about finding the right balance between accessibility and security.
Okay. Yeah, I just worried about
Valid point. I think some of the points that are being made around the table are speaking points rather than questions, but Councillor Fesso-Collins.
Thanks, Chair, Mr. Mayor. Just on the, I just wanted to come down a bit on the census experience. I worked with the community engagement group from Stats New Zealand to try and get a bit more coverage around in Manukau. I was wondering, have you had any feedback from them with regard to specific areas where voting has been low and census data pickup has been low, because they often correlate? Have you had any feedback from the census experience?
No, I haven't, but certainly we will definitely engage with Statistics New Zealand to share the experience. And actually, I was meeting this morning with Deloitte, who was the partner of Stats New Zealand on building the system, and they gave me a lot of very, very useful information on the do's and don'ts and how they went about it. But on that very specific point of different communities, no, not yet.
And just my final question, I was just wondering if there's any scholarship in relation to, in the report it talks about the voter experience, if there's any scholarship particularly around communities that don't necessarily vote, because it says it's got broad themes like it improves the experience of voters, but does that actually in the research tell us that that experience is bettered by the online experience?
So, well, not directly, because nobody's tried it. The only people who have tried it are actually our kids through the kids voting trials that we did in the last couple of elections. And so we did do a review after the kids voting experience, and I think the number is definitely in our submission, but from memory it's 74% of the kids told us that they found it easy to vote online.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Thank you, Mr.
Last
Chair.
question.
Oh, okay. And through you, I just wanted to know, your survey results, was that survey online?
Good question.
I'm going to have to come back to you on that one. I would need to go back to the survey methodology to have a look.
Yeah. Okay.
Good question.
All
That was a very good debating point. Sorry, do you have a further question to that, Councillor?
I actually would like some more information about why poll boothing wasn't considered a practical option, because I find what is important is consistency, and the fact that you've got two different voting methods does make it difficult for people to actually figure out what's going on. And the feedback I had on the ground, because we just finished the by-election today, is people saying to me, oh, where can I vote? Where can I go and vote? So, and people are going to GI Library because that's where you drop your vote off, but they're going there wanting to vote there. So so yeah, my question is, any more information on the poll
So
booth?
in 1992, so as I said before, postal voting was introduced to try and reverse the decline in booth voting in the local body elections, which was the previous way. And in 1992, the Hutt City Council tried to revert back to booth voting, and their participation rate declined from 46% to 26%. And that really frightened any other council to go back and try that. So there was it was quite an abysmal drop at that time.
That's about 10 times.
Okay.
The other thing actually that I should mention is that I don't have the figure, but I think it's 40%. I'll just find it for you. But over the last 2 or 3 general elections, what the Electoral Commission has found is that the number of people who vote before voting day is increasing dramatically. And what it shows is that people actually want the flexibility. So the traditional, I turn up to vote on the Saturday morning is fast disappearing anyway. And it was the same experience for the census, where if you remember, we would get the person at the door on a certain day. This time around, the census, you could fill the census within a period of 1 week, and again, people wanted the convenience.
Okay, thank you.
Just a last question from me. New South Wales, you mentioned that they've done electronic voting over 3 elections. What, if any, security issues has that thrown up? How does the cost of that compare to the alternative, either booth or postal voting? And 3, this answer can't be based on an Australian model because they have compulsory voting, but where online voting has been brought in, do you have other examples to demonstrate what impact that has on the level of turnout?
So on the first question about security issues with online voting, there was a controversy in 2015 or 2016, where an academic group did say that they had been able to hack into the system. What the New South Wales Electoral Commission answered is, yes, you found one weakness in the first layer of access, but there were other layers to deny you access afterwards. And, well, thank you very much for letting us know, because now we've closed the loop. So it's the way your system is built, where you've got several firewalls on, different levels of security, which enable you to stop those attacks at different levels. So they were certainly very, very confident, absolutely adamant, actually, that their system was secure and that the election had been run securely. Your second question was about cost. They spent a lot of money, and from memory, it's about $6 million Australian dollars to build that system for New South Wales. So they put a considerable amount of resources in the system. And there is no doubt that online voting will make elections more expensive before they make them cheaper. So because the fact that we are still offering both systems means that it's an extra cost. But over time, as we phase out postal voting, it will make elections cheaper. Over what period? Well, will depend on when we decide to decommission postal voting. And can you remind me of your third question?
Yeah. What evidence is there around online voting about increasing participation in systems other than Australia where it's compulsory? Not a lot of, it's not I don't have statistics that can show you that one place had a certain turnout before they introduced it and then it went up, because every system has been introduced just little by little. But that's one of the reasons why we're so adamant that we need changes to the Electoral Act, so that we've got access to as much information as we can, so we can see whether it. But there's a lot of research yet to be done in that space. The trial will actually do that, I suppose, is the short answer.
That's exactly what we would like to try and establish. Yes.
Thank you, councillors. Look, it's time to debate this. I don't want to curtail the debate because it is a significant issue, but just to remind us that we finish at 12:30, and if you want lunch between that and the workshop that follows it, if we can try to just keep the comments down to exactly what is necessary. So, speaking list, waiting to speak, Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not going to support this in principle today, but in speaking to it, I firstly want to put my credentials on the table. I do not support postal ballots and have not. I sat on the Electoral Select Committee from 1990 on, along with people like Pete Hodgson, Tony Ryle, and under the guidance of Sir Robin Gray, we saw through the MMP process. We went through the two-stager, and I was the champion for introducing the Electoral Commission because I wanted to see democracy being demystified for the public in more general sense. So I also have a suffrage centennial medal, which was granted to me on the basis of increasing women's participation in politics. And so I do not want to be seen as being narrow-minded in my opposition with this. The difficulty for me is that if you talk to a lot of people, you will hear that somehow when you challenge them about why they don't vote with postal ballots, they seem to think that local government is less important than central government. And that has come through to me time and time again. Now, what you're trying to do here, in principle, I support, Marguerite, but you can't get ahead of Parliament. And until you get alignment again between local and central government elections, I think you are, particularly where we have such a diverse community, we are getting ahead of ourselves. So our advocacy has been misguided, in my opinion. The advocacy should have been around getting back into alignment with central government elections and impressing upon the public. In many ways, local government elections are more important than central government elections. We are the government that actually impacts on people's lives far more than central government on a daily basis. So I feel that we've really missed the boat on this. I also have a real concern that there is too much information not yet required. In the best guesses that you've got is the trial will be between $1 to $1.5 million. It is not budgeted for in the current LTP. I would like to actually see more data on the success of the census. Yes, we might have had 3.5 million immediately, but where were the rest of these people and why did they not participate? There does need to be a lot more information. So, I mean, finally, I feel sad that I'm not going to support today because I hate postal ballots. I think postal ballots have been really to the detriment of local government, and it's time for change. But the change has got to be done in step, and I would be really interested in the views of the Electoral Commission. Yes, we're trying to get all of New Zealand onto online voting, but we need to get back in step with central government firstly, and journey together in a very clear relationship, demonstrating the importance of local government. So, I'm sure that there's been a lot of really good work done by Marguerite and her team, but I'm not satisfied that this is the right way to approach it. I'd also like to suggest that if we are going to send someone down to Wellington, that we send a couple of people, and I'd like to see Richard and Daniel together appearing before the Justice Select Committee, because this is a really important matter, and I just don't think that we've quite got a handle on it yet, and I would like to see us put a little bit more energy into the advocacy around standardising the electoral systems for both central and local government. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you very much. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Mike, really, I do support this. I think that we can tie ourselves in knots getting very worried about it. But in actual fact, we have to ready ourselves for the ultimate change in the postal system. We know already we're only getting deliveries 3-4 times a week if we're lucky. We have high transient levels in communities. People move all the time, and a 3-year is far too long for most people. And we have some communities, I think New Lynn is one of the most transient communities in Auckland. So you'll never keep up with people's addresses. So I think that's really important. And there often are the people that don't vote because they probably never get the forms. There's other issues for me around, it's often in school holidays, and I've had so many people say to me, I got that, I popped it on the bench, we went away on holiday, and of course the next lot of things on the bench ready for attention, It goes and they go, I cleaned up the other day and I found this at the bottom. So I think that it's the physical issue with the postal. And I mean, I don't like the fact that people can tamper with that. You go door knocking and they're lying on the ground, and you find them everywhere. So that's important. I think there's less chance of undetected intentional tampering online, and there's less chance of unintentional postal failure. You know, so I think that's really important. And after all, this is a trial. So everybody here will be hoping it's not in their area probably. But the reality is we've got to do a trial, we've got to trial it. There's nothing in this legislation that says it can continue. We've been told the safeguard is there's another piece of legislation to make it permanent, but we'll have some evidence then to work on it. But, you know, for me, I think we've got to go there. General election voting has gone up when there's been more choices, because now we have 2 weeks of early voting, and lots of people, it's more convenient for them, so they'll go along at a different time. I mean, there is still urgency with that, but there's just no urgency with a letter. It's like a bill, and a lot of people in our community see that thing that looks like a bill and they don't even look at it because it might be a bill and they don't need any more. So I do support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I'd like to acknowledge the Government Minister for bringing this bill and getting in step with us. If that's being asked for, I think we are seeing the Government be in step with us and being in step with the evidence that Marguerite has conveyed here today. So I support the thrust of the bill here, our submission. I can't help but think that many young people that I know today, they have inboxes rather than letterboxes, and in some ways they live more at that address, their email address, than they do their physical address. And I think it's a time for waking up here and recognising that we've really got to start presenting some options for young people to participate in democracy that suit them. And all the evidence is that the current methods don't suit them. So I'm keen for this. As Councillor Cooper said, this is a trial. We're not jumping into this, and it's our support in principle here today for allowing a trial, and there's a lot more work to be done. And if we chose to take a trial at this council, we'd be around this table looking at a lot more evidence, and we'll have that opportunity. I'm particularly keen to see the category for a future trial, possibly, to be young people 18 to 30. I'm particularly keen to see minority ethnic groups, and of course that is Māori, where there's a low voter turnout, and our new Aucklanders, the diversity of these new ethnic groups in Auckland, many not too new actually, for those to be taken into account. And then maybe there's the geography of the city centre, where you have a transient population, or metro centres where you've got apartment living and a lot of movement in those particular geographic areas. The other points raised in the submission I also support, and let's not overlook them. The nomination form, profile statements being lodged electronically is really important, and aligning the board and ward boundaries I support as well. But the days of inking a nomination form, surely they've gone. Doing those with a big pen every 3 years is rather strange, and it's getting stranger by the 3-year cycle. It also helps avoid the atrocious editing that I think many candidates have suffered from, many. And that could be as simple as a comma not being in the right place, let alone whole words being missed out. But that draws me to another, maybe an additional amendment, and that is that there be a New Zealand standard for the profile booklet. At the moment, electoral officers seem to do that for Auckland, do another one for Whangarei, do another one for wherever, and they are very hard to navigate. The words cross a page, there's no set format, and I think if there is opportunity in the submission, I don't know whether there's scope for it, that we could be asking for a New Zealand standard profile booklet. Security, yep, an issue. We'll face that one. There's security issues with the postal system. As we well know, all campaign putting brochures into letterboxes, and as we push our brochure in, about 5 voting papers spill out the other side onto the wet ground. We come across multiple dwelling units with voting papers on the ground. Of course they're there now. Not new, we just have to deal with it. And I totally and fully support Councillor Richard Hills representing this council at the Justice Select Committee. I think it is entirely appropriate. Our youngest member be representing, Professor. But look, I entirely support Councillor Hills representing us at the Justice Select Committee. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. I support the bill in principle in regards to the trial. I'm assuming, however, that the voting in 2019, the majority obviously is going to be postal. That's what I'm assuming, because our trial is only for 75%. 75,000. So I'm just assuming that that's exactly what the status quo around currently is. So this is why I support it in principle, because the postal vote will still continue in the 2019 triennial election. So I support that in principle. I, however, also just wanted to comment, as I said, through the questioning, Your Worship, with our submission. It's interesting that on page 14 of our submission, that there is a part in there that it's got additional amendments. Auckland Council wishes to raise 2 other electoral issues that are not addressed by the Local Electoral Matters Bill. And we've then continue on with recommendation 4 and 5. This is why I raised the question around the Manukau ward. I was told that, look, it's not part of the actual bill, but here we are submitting 2 others that are not addressed by the Local Electoral Matters Bill. So why isn't the ability to change the ward, the Manukau ward, not also included in this? So that's why I'm saying, so the process for that, Marguerite, it said that it has to go through to the Local Government Commission. No? So what is the process around changing that, Marguerite? And this is why I asked earlier, what is the process?
Okay.
Do you want to just take a moment to satisfy the councillor on that, please, Marguerite?
Absolutely. So in the Local Electoral Act, there is a process for councils to review their representation arrangements every 6 years.
Yep, got that.
We are conducting a representation review this year because we have to, and this process is underway. There is a paper which is going around the local boards just as we speak with the proposals from the Joint Governance Working Party, just getting their views on the different aspects of the changes that we are proposing. A representation review is basically looking at how we ensure that there's equal representation for every voter in a district area. And when it comes to wards, the way to make sure that that representation is equitable is to change the boundaries or to organize, to organize wards in different ways. In 2009 or 2010, when the Local Government Commission looked at the representation arrangements for Auckland, when the Auckland Council was formed, it looked at all the criteria that have to be met for representation to be equitable, including where communities of interest are and how you arrange your wards to make sure that the different voters can be represented equitably. And they came up with some double-member wards just to reflect that. And the Manukau ward is one of those wards. So when the Joint Joint Governance Working Party asked us to do some work on looking at where the different areas, what needed to be changed, we looked at whether we should make bigger wards, smaller wards, more wards, less wards, and played with the idea of whether we should look at splitting those multi-members wards. And one of the ways to look at it was to look at splitting those multi-members wards along the lines of local board areas. And Manukau is an area where you've got those two different local boards. And there were pros and cons. It certainly didn't work for Albert Eden, and it didn't work particularly well for Albany, but it could work for Manukau. There's a natural line there that would mean that representation would remain equitable. I mean, in the end, the Joint Working Party said, well, let's leave it as is. But we are absolutely in the process of reviewing those arrangements now, and if there was a desire by the governing body to split that ward as part of our representation proposal, there's definitely an opportunity to do so.
Okay, thank you. And so I'm going to close, Your Worship, and I think with the trial, the 75,000 trial is what's key from my perspective is the fact that we do get the cross-section that Councillor Darby mentioned. I think it is important in regards to the Pacific community and the large Pacific community we have in Manukau ward, is that we do have it, the representation and the voting across there. So again, as I started off my kōrero, is that I support in principle the 75,000 trial, and the majority would be postal still. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think, look, I think in terms of all of the issues that need to be addressed is with respect to local government electoral matters, this bill is too narrow. I think for a government bill, I would have wanted to see a government bill in relation to local electoral matters deal with a lot more than trial for online voting. And I think that there is a risk here that the discussion becomes too discursive in relation to online voting when there are so many other things that are going to need to be addressed too. I have no problem supporting a trial for online voting. I do think that the issue around the census is going to be really important, and the benchmark is not how many people are using the census online option and getting their forms in as soon as possible. That's not the issue. The issue is how many people are not, because the census information is critical to informing investment decisions across a range of social services, health, education, etc. That's the issue, and for me, the jury is out. My prediction around online voting is it will make almost no difference in terms of increased turnout, decreased turnout. You know, I think that the same cohort of people, older voters, are going to continue to be very well represented in terms of voting, and that's not because of a voting methodology. That's not necessarily because of anything other than a value system in relation to how people perceive the role of local government in their life. And Councillor Fletcher is right. Local government is far more important to the day-to-day issues affecting people than I would suggest a lot of the decisions taken at central government. The issue that I think needs to be addressed, and it is addressed in the submission but not in the bill, are the additional amendments that have been sought in the submission, and this relates to the representation arrangements. And for that reason, Chair, Your Worship, I had mused about proposing that Councillor Wayne Walker appear before the Select Committee on this matter, or if not Councillor Walker, someone from the governance, the Joint Governance Working Party that's having to address some of these substantive issues at the moment. I do think that we need someone who's on that working party to present the submission as well, because you know, we do have a conundrum at the moment in relation to the likelihood that we're going to have to decouple the wards and the local boards, because the bill doesn't address the ability of us to ensure that we can adjust local board boundaries where appropriate. That is a substantial issue that needs to be resolved. It's not addressed here. The number of governing body members is not addressed in this bill. These are issues that are important. They are not addressed in the bill itself, but they need to be addressed via our advocacy. Alf, I acknowledge your comments in relation to the Manukau ward representation. I think that will be, I would expect that there would be submissions from the local boards, and I would expect that, I'm assuming, I'm foreshadowing that there'll probably be some amendments put up by councillors from the Manukau ward in relation to representation and ward splitting when that comes back before us in September. But I think that those arguments would be better, would be addressed, helpfully addressed, if the bill actually picked up the recommendations that have been set out in our submission from para 73 onwards. So, Your Worship, the last thing I'll say, Your Worship, probably, look, I think that there are 3 wards that are candidates for online voting as a trial: Rodney, Franklin and Foe. And I think if you're going to have a trial where you're trying to get a broader cross-section of Auckland, it's probably going to have to be in the Foe ward, actually. I haven't talked to Councillor Clough about that, but it'll have to be one of those 3 wards. And that will have to be a matter that's thoroughly researched to ensure that we address concerns about security. So, Your Worship, just in conclusion, Your Worship, I'm available. Yeah, I don't mind going to the Select Committee to talk about some of these matters, but if not me, in addition to Councillor Hills, I think it would have to be another member of the Joint Governance Working Group that's considering these matters that are addressed in our submission but not currently picked up on in the bill.
Thank you. Councillor Hills.
Yes, thank you. Obviously support the recommendations, but I think it's important to say what this is and what this isn't. This is just another tool to help potentially more people vote, but also help people who are currently voting to maybe vote easier. I don't think, as Marguerite says, that this is the panacea and going to miraculously change voter turnout. We know voter turnout was about 11% higher in the first Super City elections, and that maybe because there was so much publicity around it, media, you know, and it was interesting. It was a brand new election. Everyone wanted to be involved. That did kind of drop down for many other reasons. All the studies show that the main reasons people don't vote, especially young people, is they don't understand, they forgot, or they uninterested. So that this may not affect that at all. But I think the main points we need to think about is postal voting is on the way out, and we need something. Postal, I couldn't even tell you where my closest post box is anymore. I know there's one at the mall, but that's about it. The other thing is, I think anecdotally, the feedback I have, especially from younger people during the campaign, is, I'll do it online. Can I do it online? Why can't I do it online? And that's not just younger people, but especially the last week or so when it's all ramped up and you're trying to get the last people out to vote. People go, I don't know where I put my papers. Surely I can do it online. But you get to a point 3 or 4 days before you think the postal votes will get there, where you just have to give up. Everyone please go try and drop it at the library, but people just don't have time in their 9 to 5 day to get to a library in those last couple of days where people are focusing on it. I know that booth voting, although it's been brought up here, I think once again the issue is with the postal and potentially online, you're going to have all the information there to compare, to go through your, I think in my local board, there's 24 candidates for the local board, there was 12 candidates for council, then you've got all the other areas too. If you're in a booth under pressure, I just don't think people are going to, the majority of people have much chance to really sit there and go, who am I? You know, you have to do a lot of pre-planning in that phase to get into a booth and feel comfortable with picking all your choices. So this is a tool. This is something that will increase. We know you'll probably see in the census data an increase in online use across New Zealand now. The last Nielsen survey, I think 88% of households now have the internet or access to, and obviously you'll be able to take your code down to the library or to other places where we know lots of people in my community are accessing the internet in our libraries. They're becoming more internet-focused spaces than book spaces in some cases. And the other thing is the census. Yes, I take Councillor Newman's point around it's the people who are not going online that are an issue, but I think it was pretty amazing for in the first the 2 weeks there was over 3.5 million people who filled out their census online, which I definitely did not expect myself. So this won't fix apathy. It won't fix the issue that people find politics negative. This won't necessarily fix that people don't understand the process, or the fact that, you know, a central government election is so obvious. It's what colour do you like better often, as opposed to the myriad of choices you have through local government in New Zealand and Auckland especially. So other countries like the UK or Australia, it's all very much down party lines still, and it's quite easy often in those areas to go, okay, I know I'm going to support the values of that party and I'll tick the candidate, whereas here you have to do a lot of background reading about the people and the candidates because of the non-partisan, which is not a bad thing, but that's often why I think people don't understand or trust the system maybe. So this is a tool. I think it's very good. I think it's exciting. I think we need to support it, but I also want to make sure that we also don't make it too onerous and act like the people voting online need extra voter ID, and then we make it more cumbersome for those people. But because, like we say, the booth and the postal voting, there is no proof that you are the person you're voting for. We trust people, and we know it's extremely, the law will deal with people who are found out to be voting illegally in any form. So, of course, I support this, but continue to engage that it won't fix everything. We all have individual work to do on that basis to make people like local government, understand local government, and be more engaged with us and what we're doing and how they can make an effect in their communities.
Thank you. With 5 seconds to go, Councillor Casey.
Oh, thank you. I want to bring everything back to where Marguerite started, and that's with regard to a few words that we use day and daily and which appear regularly in our plans and strategies. The words are accessible, welcoming and inclusive. This is a chance, councillors, to walk the talk. Our 6 demographic panels strongly support this move to an online trial, and that's all it is, it's a trial. But most especially it was supported by our Disability Advisory Panel. In fact, so strong was that support, it's outlined by Marguerite in her report. And the panel says, it's especially important for disability communities, many of whose members experience difficulty in casting their votes independently. An inclusive city would make it easier for people with a disability to cast their vote. That's what this is. It's a trial. The fears, the alarms, the fears will be tested in the trial. And it may be that it's all too hard and we don't do it. But we can't not do it because we owe it to our diverse communities to go ahead with it.
Here.
And I'm going to suggest, notwithstanding the opposition of my fellow councillor in the ward and the lobbying of Councillor Newman for the full ward, I would again like to suggest that my ward is one of the most diverse in Auckland, and you are very welcome to come.
Too big.
But that's Albert Eden Roskill, just in case anybody wondered. But the other thing that I want to suggest, which would be another first for the council, is for Richard to go to Wellington with Philip Patson, who's the chair of the Disability Advisory Panel. This is about online voting. It's got the panel's support, and there's nothing like hearing it directly from the people most affected. So if, with the mayor's indulgence, if you'd like to do that, if not, it's fine, but I think it would be really strengthen the position that we have if Philip went. And he's great.
He's very good. Thank you very much. Interesting suggestion. We'll come back to that one. Professor Collins, I think on behalf of Councillor Simpson.
That's correct, sir. And then I'm on your list as well, if that's all right.
Oh, what
I'll read
wrap the two up within the five.
Well, we tend to agree a lot these days. The member from Ōrākei says, there's nothing wrong with the principle, with supporting in principle, as the final decision won't be made until later. If the security doesn't stack up or other concerns, then we can say no later. I think the bigger issue is ensuring people do vote. Where then is the legislation change to be made to make voting compulsory, is the question. The final comment is, if local government truly impacts people's lives more than central government, then everybody needs to choose who will make decisions on their behalf. So the question stands from Councillor Simpson as to where is the legislation change or the ability to, in principle, support some kind of advocacy to make voting compulsory. Not sure if you want to pick that up, Mr. Mayor, and get an answer for it, or whether it's just posed.
It takes the debate much wider than what we can deal with here, but it's an interesting thought.
Cool.
Councillor, you're going to speak on your own behalf now?
So I just wanted to say that, granted I'm the liaison person for the youth panel, they completely endorse this. And I think it's really important that we understand from our own youth panel, as already noted by Councillor Casey with the panels in general, but the youth panel are really supportive of online voting. The few comments that I wanted to make probably refer to an article that I read yesterday in the New Zealand Herald. I don't read the Herald a lot these days. But there was an opinion piece written by Derek Handley, and those of you who read the opinion piece he wrote, he talked about a visit he made to Otara Library and the conversation he had with the manager of the library there, Ian Toki, and he asked Ian, when is the busiest time for young people coming through? And Ian said to him, the busiest time we have here at our library is 3:30 to 5:30, because our kids come with phones that have no data on them, and they use their phones sitting outside the library or inside the library to use the internet, because you got the free internet coverage. And the reason I want to support this in principle, I want to note that I took well to the points that Councillor Fletcher made. I think those are really important points, and they really broaden this discussion, so I welcome those comments. But I want to support this in particular because the online mechanism is another way in which we can help, we can assist, we can facilitate the participation from those communities that we don't usually work with, or that don't usually vote. I worked with the Stats New Zealand team who were out in South Auckland all the time. We went to every possible event going on. We went to churches, we went to public groups, so that we could encourage our people to fill out the census form. I just want to pause for a moment on that. The reason why, and this is covered in scholarship, not just in New Zealand, but all over the world, on why new migrants, especially Pacific and Indigenous people, don't fill out census forms. And I wonder if it correlates to voting patterns that we have from poorer communities. They don't want to be identified. No one, when you've got bills outstanding and you've got Bay Corp chasing you, you don't want people to know, especially Bay Corp, where you live. And that's one of the issues that a lot of our people are facing. The other one is a lot of people are scared out south as to whether they'll be identified because someone might ask them, are you carrying New Zealand citizenship? Now this goes back, this is an historical issue for many of our people, but the research supports it in that they still feel that way. If your parents felt that way, if you were chased like crazy during the Dawn raids, your children are going to feel that way as well. And I think we need to take into consideration those aspects as to why a lot of our communities are not voting. And so I think it's really important that we understand this is a tool, as Councillor Hills has already said, and this is a tool that will support and facilitate that level of participation. I warmly welcome the suggestion by Councillor Casey to have the chair, he's the chair, isn't he, of the disabilities panel. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that show Auckland, wouldn't that show us as a city that really is moving forward, that we want not just our elected members, and I endorse Councillor Hills going down, but we want a voice within council, but a voice of the community to be representing us as well. I think this is great. And just finally, the issues that Councillor Newman raises around Recommendation 5 and the wider discussion, I think are things we really need to talk about. We've got to find places where we can have input into that wider discussion. So that is just as important. But as far as the online tool goes, I think it's really important that we support it today in principle. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Encouraging greater voter participation is basically morally the right thing to be doing, particularly if we're talking about trying to engage our youth and our ethnic minority groups into the decision-making processes of Auckland Council. So I'm happy to support this going to trial. However, I don't think we should put an entire ward in a trial. I think there's just too many security and other unanswered questions around that. To put a whole local board area into the trial in total, I think it would be wiser to take subdivisions across Auckland, and particularly those subdivisions within wards that represent the target group that we're looking at, i.e. the disabilities, the people that might be overseas at those times, and our ethnic minority groups and our young people. So I warmly support the input from Councillor Casey, Councillor Filipina, Councillor Chris Darby along those lines. I think at the end of the day, from this trial, what we're really looking for is some helpful quantitative data. And I'd be particularly interested to see from that trial how successful it was in engaging those particular target groups. So my point is to target those groups perhaps through subdivision wards. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. I do support this trial, noting that I'm the liaison councillor for the disability sector, so the accessibility concerns raised resonate with me, and I support what they're saying. In terms of this online voting, I do support it as an option, but I still think postal voting should be in the mix, and I'm glad that it will be, because there are people that don't know how to use the computer, and there are people that don't know how to use their phones, people that don't have access to data or internet. So, you know, some people are just, that is their only way of communicating or voting would be postal voting, so I want to see that retained. I do agree with what Councillor Fletcher was saying, and that's why I asked about booth poll voting. And I note that this is from 1992, which is a long time ago. And people do, I agree with Councillor Fletcher that people do think that local government is less than central government, is less important than central government. So I do want to see consistency in the methods of how people can vote. Yeah, but I do support this. Majority in my ward are in the age bracket that support online voting, so I go with that, but I also see those that don't have access to the internet won't be interested in voting on the computer, which is why I asked about how the medium of your survey. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and be brief. I really applaud the efforts of our staff to try and address, you know, this issue of voter turnout, because it is a very real issue, and it is something that, you know, that we should be trying to improve. I guess my reservation is that if we're going to do things, then we hope these are things that are going to make a difference if we're putting resource and spending time in delivering them. And I've heard what people have said, and I think there's a number of good arguments on both sides. What I have a bit of a concern about is that the notion of, you know, anything online is very, you know, 21st century, and on the face of it, it sounds, you know, perfectly logical that is going to work, that is going to engage people. People do it in all sorts of other areas of their life. Why wouldn't you do it in voting? I would sort of give a votion of caution on that, though, because some of the research tends to indicate otherwise when it comes to online voting. Certainly you can't disagree about groups in the community that really have difficulties getting there, then they should be facilitated. Estonia was mentioned. We mentioned it in our submission paper. And I think, as Councillor Lee says, Estonia maybe wasn't the best example, and not just from the obvious nature that it's perhaps a smaller, poorer country. There were, and this was validated by a University of Michigan study. There were real complexities to do with the technology of it, and I don't propose to go on to that, but real issues in terms of safeguarding the integrity of the issue. And my concern with that was addressing it is quite expensive, and it doesn't provide a guarantee. But what probably stood out to me more was the effect of the young voters in Estonia, where actually their participation rates over the internet are coming down, and that's mirrored in Norway as well. So, and there's a counterintuitive reason for that, in that the young people are very more familiar with online activity than any, but in another sense they're also more distrustful of it because they've been hacked, they've have bad experiences on it. So I have a doubt as to the extent that online voting will really improve just that one part of our community. And I think Councillor Fletcher again has really raised the critical issue, and that is, why do people regard the council as such a low priority? That's surely the thing to start with, especially when we know that there's double the turnout when it comes to national elections. Why is that? Now's not the place to go with it. We did mention kids online voting being successful. Yes, it is successful. I've taken part in that. It is successful, but it's not successful just because it's online. It's successful because teachers take a block of time to run through the process with students, encourage them to vote, encourage them to ask questions. That's why it's successful. And that's reflected in the election when you have conversations with people. So I actually give people more credit than perhaps we do for decisions not to engage in the council election process. And I would suggest that they're not superficial, they're not down to being lazy, they're not down to being unaware of where are post boxes in the mall. They're a lot more substantial than that. And I think in that instance, we as a particular group have a bigger issue than I would suggest other councils around New Zealand, and that's actually reflected in the polling. Certainly, last week with respect of items that we dealt with, and I mentioned one of my own to do with the Ariwa Centre, people in my ward are saying, well, why do we bother voting, John? We elect local board, we take time to elect local board people, we take time to elect ward councillors, we have a view, we're not consulted. What does that do for voter turnout? Because I can't turn around and say, no, actually you should vote. It does make a difference, it is important. An increasing number of instances, not just in this case, but another one, people are quite justified in saying, well, why would I bother? And that's why a lot of people do. So I would just finish up by saying that the issue here is actually far more substantial, and I don't want to give the impression that just going to online voting will get young people out, which you would think. That's really not satisfactory. It gives the wrong message, in my view, and I think we have to deal with a far more substantive issue. And there are simple, straightforward ways we can do that in our own behaviour and our own processes.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yeah, I'm certainly supportive of online voting for the disabled community, for people overseas and so on. I think that's highly desirable. But I guess my concern when I make the comparison with what you've got in hard copy form and also the postal voting system at home is what I see in practice, particularly in households, is something quite different, both as it goes to the census, but also the postal vote. And my observation is often in a household, one person will say, well, have you got it in? Have you filled it in? And they round everybody up and they take the postal votes to the post office or the supermarket or wherever they are. And I also see a close association between filling something in and I guess being a bit old-fashioned and turning up at meetings and actually engaging with people directly. And my fear is that we're going to move away from that altogether, which is what is happening elsewhere, and the increasing interference on the part of various groups that use Facebook and all sorts of things, and we've seen that in the US, and we're seeing it elsewhere. where elections are increasingly manipulated, and they're easy to manipulate online as compared to other ways of doing it. And I think what we've got here in terms of online voting is increasingly online electioneering, and I think that there are real issues around that. So they're just some concerns that I'm putting on the table, Mr. Chair. I think there's a lot more we could do to enhance the postal voting experience, arguably a voting at a booth experience as well, and why don't we have that, and our publicity. So I have some real concerns. Just one thing I would note, and that is I'm making the assumption that in the online nomination, that includes the photograph, because I did note in a particular election that a candidate, and I won't name him, actually had somebody else's photograph in his place. And
that was me.
I don't know that it was to his detriment, but certainly online nomination, I think that's great.
Yeah. You weren't putting up George Clooney's photo, were you, John? Penultimate speaker is Mike Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief. There are a number of reasons for relatively low voter turnout in local government elections, and they appear to be complex, and members around the table have suggested reasons, and I believe there is no one single reason, but a multiplicity of reasons. It's a complex issue. But one thing is clear: smaller entities, smaller polities, communities tend to vote more than bigger ones. So in our own super city, the turnout from Great Barrier Island, 71%, is extraordinary compared to the average. And again, the 60% on Waiheke is relatively high. And so communities of interest, genuine communities, appear to be more active in politics and in other activities, community activities. So we can understand that. Now, we would like a greater voter turnout, and last time round the council spent a considerable amount of money trying to whip up enthusiasm about the election and local government in general, and unfortunately did not appear to succeed if the average turnout was 38.5%, but the intention was good. As regards to this government bill, I'm not too sure what the stated purpose is. It's not really clear whether the purpose is to enhance turnout, but we assume that it is. However, just about everything the government does to us means extra costs, and it's something that we often complain about. But if you go back through the decision process, often the council itself has been enthusiastic for these extra responsibilities, which turn out to cost quite a lot. Now, I would imagine, and I'm certain, that the cost of ensuring IT security, and this is a dynamic, ongoing, changing process, are going to be very high indeed. And I think the council, in its submission, has really failed to take that into account and needs to raise this matter of costs and a cost apportionment with the central government. Again, it's their idea. We're assuming their purpose is to increase participation, though it's not really explicit. But we need to raise questions, and we need to have some really serious data, how much this will cost. Because going from our own recent experience with new IT systems, that doesn't always work that well, despite the huge eye-watering costs of it. We should be cautious about this point especially. So I rather than going down there and being extremely bushy-tailed and enthusiastic about this neat new techo way of voting, which young people are going to be attracted to in their droves and so on, I think we need to take a more sensible, considered approach to this, a precautionary approach. And to that end, I would nominate Councillor Newman to also be a delegate, given his role in the committee supervising the local wards and local board areas and wards, because that is of something of vital importance to this council. Rather than, here's the other danger, rather than sitting back and waiting for the online voting to solve our participation problem, we should be thinking hard about a multiplicity of things that we could do next time. And given it's still likely to be a postal vote, how we can enhance, improve the efficiency of that postal vote, like, for instance, talking to NZ Post and getting them to do extra deliveries in those last few days. Something pretty simple. But anyway, let's think about that and not just rely on a single techo solution. Let's exercise some caution on behalf of our voters and our ratepayers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Can I just close the debate with a couple of very brief comments, because it's been a long debate. The first thing is I'm in favour of trialling the system, and the first and important reason is that there is a strength of support to do so. We've seen that there's nearly 3/4 of our electorate think that it's a good idea to trial, and we've seen every one of our advisory panels. And, you know, I think if we ignored what our advisory panels said, they might wonder why they exist. Secondly, there is an inevitability about things happening online for the future. I can't believe that we can't, for example, nominate to stand for these positions online. In the future, I doubt that we will have a postal system like we have it at the moment. And if we are going to move to doing it online, it is much more sensible to trial that before jumping in and doing it right across the board. You know, yes, there will be problems, or could be problems with security, just as there are problems with security right now with postal voting. Nobody knows who fills out those ballot papers and sends them in. We have no clue at all. There is no security around the fact that the person's ballot paper was filled out by that individual, or even with their consent. So I think we need to trial it. I'm sure that the system can be made to work, because it does work in other jurisdictions and works effectively there. The third and last thing I want to reiterate is, if we think that this is a panacea for a voting turnout, we're sadly mistaken. There are complex reasons why the turnout is lower for local government. One is the complexity of the number of votes that people have to count, have to take into account. The second is the profile of the individuals. The third is the lack of a party label, which facilitates voting in a number of different cases. I think that it's also a judgment that people make about where the major decisions are made in this country. They figure that government is the one that has the chequebook, and government is the one that counts, and we do what governments deign to allow us to do. We're not going to solve all of those problems with a new voting system. We shouldn't pretend that we'll be trying to solve those problems, but I think we should facilitate a way of voting which will be seen as a 21st century way of voting. It doesn't make sense that people overseas have to physically fill out their ballot paper. It's an absolute impediment to people that are temporarily out of the city being able to vote. It does make it easier, I think, for people that may be suffering from disability to cast their vote. So I think the arguments on balance are in favour of trialling it, and that's what I want to support. Councillors, before we get into voting on this, we have a challenge. that recommendation B reads, or originally read, appoint a member of the governing body. I have since had 4 nominations from councillors Hills, Newman, Wayne Walker and Ross Clow, and had a further suggestion that somebody from one of the panels would be good to accompany whoever is representing the council's point of view. On a select committee, the maximum time you've got is for 2 people to represent the council. You just don't have the time to have more than 2. So I think if we're looking at numbers, it would have to be 2. Secondly, if we're looking at that being held in Wellington, I'm not sure that we could justify the cost of sending 3 people to Wellington. So my proposal is that there be 2 persons. Unless I have a better suggestion, I'm suggesting that we simply cast a ballot to determine which 2 out of 5 nominees, if councillors are comfortable with the chair of the disability panel being a nominee, which 2 out of those 5 should go forward.
Can we do that online?
Mr Chairman, just a quick question.
Yeah.
Do
Councillor
we know,
Fletcher.
can Marguerite advise whether there has been an indication that the select committee will be meeting in Auckland, given...
I don't think we've had that advice yet, but Marguerite, can you help us with that?
No, I haven't heard.
Can we do a video link?
You could do it by video, but I think it's important. Well, you could do it. You could Skype, but I think actually it's the physical presence of a person down there is important. Councillor Cooper.
Just a question. I mean, if you look at Ms Dalbay here, she's done all of the work here and understands it inside out. And I think when there's questions, we can have opinions around the table. But when there's questions, that's quite critical. And look, I'm not against the panel members going, but there's so many panels and so many people. How do you, I worry that you'll have, oh, well, is this good for you? Otherwise, it's no good elect a person go, oh, I'm not sure about that. When it's top of mind for the person that's been doing the actual report and the work.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just my view. I just think we're trying to please everybody, and we're not going to anyway with a ballot.
It's the normal case that Marguerite would be there with the person. Is that what? Right.
Generally, you'd be, but depending on the complexity of the issue, sometimes it's essential to have a staff member there. I think Marguerite has briefed us sufficiently that a governing body member would be able to do that, okay. But that's an equally valid alternative to have 1 member and 1 staff member.
It's not unusual, is it?
That's not unusual. It's I think when we did the regional fuel tax, the Deputy Mayor and I were there. It was in Auckland, so cost wasn't a factor, and we had probably 3 staff members. They weren't called upon to come to the table to answer questions, but they could have been. So I'm still in a position where, unless somebody comes up with a better alternative, we will simply ballot as for 2 members. Councillor Clow.
Yes, I'm not sure where my nomination came from, but I don't think it was nominated, so I will withdraw. But I just point out that there is the issue of the travel budget, and members are really keen to squash that down. I would have thought, to be consistent, we would not be wanting to add more people. Exactly. And whilst I have total sympathy with what Councillor Casey has suggested there, if we have the example of something to do with transport, do we send someone from Bike Auckland, or something like that? You start to open the floodgates a bit.
It's our view.
Where you're getting other entities
going
along.
I'll just take it if there's any more comments. Otherwise, I'm going to put a couple of suggestions to you. The first is I'm going to ask for a vote on whether we should have 1, and I'll make it a governing body member, 1 or 2 governing body members. So can I just get an indication? Those in favour of having 1 governing body member, please raise your hands. Can somebody call upon to do the count? I'll go for 1. Okay, those in favour of more than 1, or 1 accompanied by somebody else? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, now I get it. Sorry, I beg your pardon.
I didn't understand the vote.
Okay, sorry.
That was 1 and 2, and then you were going to do the other choices.
Okay, the first choice is that we are represented by one person only. Okay, is there somebody that misvoted in not understanding? Let me put the vote again. Those in favour of 1 member only being a governing body member going down.
Supported by a staff member.
Okay.
With a staff member.
Supported by a staff member.
I wasn't recommending with a staff member, but is it?
And this is based on Wellington only for select committee hearings.
If it's in Auckland, it's not a problem. Okay.
To have a vote without people interjecting.
Yeah. No. People are trying to get some clarity, councillor, and I'm trying to help them. Okay. So let me put the suggestion that I detect that there is a feeling that there should be, if there's only one governing body member, there should be a staff member. So I'll put the first option as a governing body member accompanied by a staff member.
Yep.
Please raise your hands. 8. Okay, the second option is to have two governing body members plus a staff member.
Do we need a staff?
Two governing body members.
I'm putting that as an option to try and get an indication, because I don't have too many other ways of determining what your views are. So that's two governing bodies members plus a staff member. Please raise your hand if you support that. So, sorry,
Mr. Chairman.
Yep, point of order from Councillor Fletcher.
I want clarity.
Yep.
There may be a view that two governing members can represent without a staff member, so you're going to have a third option
I'll give you that option
So
as
can
well.
we start off on the basis that we just have two
Politicians
governing body
should know
members?
about elections.
Okay, so
This is preferential voting.
I'll put it. I'm simply getting an indication of what your views are. It's probably the quickest way I can do it. So the third option, at the suggestion of Councillor Fletcher, is two governing body members.
About the travel budget, that's what I'm concerned
Okay, what we've got, if you're looking at where the majority may lie there, is that there'd be one governing body member plus a staff member. So now I'm asking for nominations for that governing body member.
Councillor Hills will nominate.
Yep.
So I've got Councillor Hills,
Councillor Newman.
Councillor Newman.
I'm not interested in this anymore.
Okay.
I didn't vote.
No further nominations. So I will declare Councillor Hills to be the representative of the governing body, accompanied by the appropriate staff member. So that is recommendation 2 of our recommendations. Now, can I put the 3 recommendations together? And I haven't had a division called for, but you can indicate if you're opposed to it. So I'm moving...
You missed a choice, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
The other one was perhaps the disability chairman.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Councillor, I was somewhat sympathetic to your view, but I detected the view around the table that wasn't the most appropriate way of doing it. So I'm putting recommendations A, B and C, which have been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no.
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 Can I have my vote declared again?
Okay, so those who want to register votes against are Councillor Newman, Councillor Fletcher,
Walker and Watson.
and Councillor Wayne Walker and Councillor Watson.
No, I just voted against it. I don't particularly need it.
Okay, that's good. So three people on record as being against it. Okay.
A point of clarification too, that if councillors in their individual capacity wish to make a submission on
Sorry,
this
can I please have order when somebody's raising a point of order?
If councillors in their individual capacity wish to make a submission on the bill, they can do so.
There's nothing stopping any individual as an individual making a submission to the select committee. That's absolutely
Thank
right.
you very much.
We
I know that, but I just wanted to
Nobody
make it
loses
quite
their
clear.
right to do that. Okay.
Sorry.
Point of order, Councillor Filippino.
Well, it's not, I just wanted to, if we find out that the select committee will be in Auckland, that way at least the ability for others to attend, to support, I'm assuming would happen, as is the case on the 28th, when I will be representing council on the sale and supply of alcohol in front of the select committee in Auckland, with 3 members of the local board, 3 chairs of the local board. So I'm assuming that that is open, because I don't want this to go through and then we find in Auckland and say, no, the recommendation was only Councillor Hills.
Let's clarify that point.
At the beginning.
Sorry, if the select committee hearing is to be held in Auckland, anybody is welcome to attend. I would still very strongly recommend that we would only be represented at the table by two people for the reasons I spelt out. Okay, everybody's happy with that, and I've just detected Councillor Wayne Walker didn't want to have his vote recorded against. Is that correct?
More than happy with that.
So it's...
I can always do it online.
Yeah. So we've just got two that wanted their vote declared. Need to clarify that.
Please have a
I'm
break.
keen to press ahead unless you really want a break at the moment. The reason for that is that at 1:30, I think, Councillor Clow, you've got your
1 o'clock.
1 o'clock, and it's in the other building, and the lunch is in the other building. So if we want to get through this agenda, which we must, I'd like to press ahead if there's no objection to that. So we come to item number 11, and can I ask John Nash and Chair of the Waiheke Local Board, Kath Hanley, please to come forward. My apologies, Kath, for keeping you waiting for such a long time. This is a recommendation to seek a delegation to the local board on Waiheke to make land use and development decisions over the land at Matiatia, and this is in line with an earlier resolution by this governing body to look at a trial delegation of functions where appropriate to the local board. Kath, I think I'll ask you just to lead off, and then John to talk to the paper.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor and councillors, for the opportunity. Just a correction, my name is misspelt in your minutes.
Oh, yes.
N.
It shouldn't have a D there.
No, it should have an N.
But it should have
ND.
ND. Okay, I know. It's right on mine. It's right on mine. Yeah.
Just to backtrack slightly, this is for, I think for you, but particularly for the Waiheke Local Board, a watershed decision, and that you have, as a governing body, decided to set up the Waiheke Governance Pilot. And although there are a number of ways that that is being implemented on the ground at the moment, this is the first major delegated authority that we have sought, and it is with respect to Matiatia, which is also our Ollie, or as I call it, our onesie, which features very largely in both the RLTP and also the LTP, with respect to potential funding for the major redevelopment of Matiatia. It has stalled now for 13 years, and in that time, obviously, growth in population and the number of commuters, but really dramatically the number of tourists, has exacerbated what is a highly congested area for a major transport hub, which that is. So it connects everybody on our island with, other than through the car ferry, with the mainland. So I do seek your support here today in this delegation to the local board to enable us to lead the development. We're actually highly motivated to do this, and I think one advantage is that if responsibility is shifted to the local board, it will be sheeted home by every single person on Waiheke at local board level, and locals that will help to shift perceptions over time with respect to Auckland Council, and particularly Auckland Transport and other CCOs. So I think there is that advantage. But the main one is that we are there, we have been working with the community, we are working with all the agencies involved, and this would give us the opportunity now to move this forward finally. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Kath, and thank you for keeping it so concise and to the point. We could take questions of Kath now, or we could hear from John as well, and then questions to either. I intend to move in the latter path, unless there's any objections to that. John, if you'd like to speak to the paper.
Thank you, Your Worship. Obviously, a lot of time has already elapsed this morning. I'm equally happy to answer questions or give a brief summary if some members wish to have a summary of the paper and the intent.
Thank you very much. That was even briefer. I've had an indication from Councillor Clow wishes to move it, and maybe Councillor Lee, as the local member, would like to second it. Okay, so let's open it up to questions. I think it's pretty straightforward, but let's open it up to questions first. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally don't have any issues. Just got 2 or 3 quick questions. First off, there isn't, I don't think, any proposal to sell any of the land in question. Is that correct?
That's correct. And also that power can't be delegated anyway. But no, there is no intention.
And the reasoning for that, is it because it's of a strategic nature, or?
All of the land down at Matete is of a strategically high value. So it is a very small footprint for a very large amount of traffic, whether that's foot traffic, cycling traffic, public transport, tours and commuting.
Okay, and as far as the land that we lease, I'm assuming we get a good return on that lease.
We don't get that information in terms of it being current, but our understanding is, or our estimates, best estimates are that at the moment it's giving somewhere between a 4 and 5% return, and that's without it being actively managed. So there are a lot of other commercial opportunities and opportunities for revenue sit within the footprint, but the way in which it's configured at the moment doesn't maximise return.
So part of the exercise here on the part of the Waiheke Local Board is that you'll effectively be more directly involved in the active management, and we could expect arguably more use and more return.
We would be responsible for governance, not management.
Yep.
But the answer is yes, we'll be overseeing very closely the management of that and the decision making.
And the last question, just in terms of the return on the leases, is that going to be going to the coffers of the Waiheke Local Board for local improvements or the like, or does that go into the general coffers?
Through the Chair, Councillor, at the moment it's Panuku return on commercial leases and Auckland Transport for parking. So the Auckland Transport return on parking would continue to be with Auckland Transport. The intention is that the commercial leases transfer to community facilities. There is a commercial lease team there, so there's obviously, as Kath was alluding to, a significant upgrade of some of those facilities needed, but because the local board and community facilities will be working together on this, there's an opportunity in terms of the return to achieve some direct outcomes there that satisfy the local board as well.
So am I hearing that part of the idea is that some of the return from the area can go to the local board so it can activate the improvements? Is that what I'm hearing? Or
through the
not?
Chair, there will need to be further discussion with the Community Facilities commercial team about how that actually plays out, but in terms of improvements at Matiatia, that's certainly one of the intentions.
Okay. There being no other questions, we'll move to comments now. Is there any councillor that would wish to comment on this? I think it'll have widespread support. Councillor Fletcher.
Your Worship, I think that this is a wonderful move. To confer the governance onto the local board is the smart thing to do. For those who are new to the politics of Waiheke, this has just been such a long simmering issue. Far too much has been put into the pockets of lawyers on the matter, and it's actually time to empower the community to ensure that some appropriate development can take place. So can I commend John, can I commend Kath for coming along today? I think I'd really encourage everyone to support it. It's long overdue.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clow.
Yeah, at the workshop at 1 o'clock, you will find that we've subdivided the Ollies, which were advocacy items, so let's be quite clear, that was how it was. It wasn't necessarily a local board thing, it was an advocacy item, but we've separated 5 of them into transport-related initiatives, and 6 are under sub-regional, and the rest are going to be coming from the Ollie budget. So just say this is one of the 5 in the transport related initiatives that are covered by fuel tax or regional land transport plans. So this aligns and will happen. So.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yeah, I really want to speak in support of this, Mr Chair. And I'm really encouraged that the land is being retained, because quite obviously it has a strategic purpose, as I would suggest exists elsewhere around the region. I'm encouraged that the local board is going to be able to activate the area and make more of it, so that not only does the local board benefit financially, but activation and placemaking and so on, and I'm assuming that placemaking as part of this will happen. So this is really good and might be a model for what could happen in other locations around the region.
Thank you very much. If there's no other speakers, sorry, Kathy.
Just to say woohoo, and my Save Matia t-shirt could be worth a lot of money in the future. Well done.
It's a museum
Great.
piece. Just to indicate my strong support for this, this is totally consistent with the decision that this governing body has made to run a pilot project, to devolve appropriate decision making to a local board, and for that matter entirely appropriate with the commitment that I personally made to people in Waiheke about that. This is a classic example of a decision that the governing body of actually a couple of councils has failed to resolve over a very long period of time, and a decision that is singularly important to Waiheke and that doesn't need to be consistent with a decision that this body makes on a regional basis. I also note that it's consistent with the Local Government Commission's report, both its general support for the trial of devolution, but also its specific proposal in regard to passing to the local board a strong input on the future of Mātiatia. This doesn't give away control of regulatory matters that have to be dealt with over the region. It is dealing with a specific issue, and there is no group better aware and informed and committed to solving this problem than the people of Waiheke as represented on their local board. So I strongly support the recommendations ahead of us. Our expectations as a governing body are set out, and I don't think, Kath, any of those will come as a surprise or a shock to you, but I think we've landed in exactly the right place. So thank you for the work that you and the board have put in, Kath, and John, thank you for your commitment in this area as well. I'll put the resolution, the recommendations have been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. That was a very long time to wait for a rapid passing of the motion. Thanks very much.
9,000 hectares on Waiheke. This is 8.7.
Yeah, it's quite an important 8.7, councillor, at that.
Thank you very much.
We now come to item number 12, which is the recommendations from the Appointments, Performance Review and Value for Money Committee. Is Sally here? I've asked Sally to come to the table. This is dealt with by this committee, but we report our recommendations back to the governing body, and our recommendations from that committee is to approve the terms of reference for 2 reviews, one into information, communication and technology, and the second into customer services. So, Sally, would you like to... I'll move it formally, I think seconded by Councillor Desley Simpson. If you'd like to talk briefly to it, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, of course, we're seeking to get approval for these terms of reference. And just by way of background, the two new terms of reference are very much follow a standard approach that we've adopted for the previous reviews. If you recall, Three Waters, domestic waste, communications and engagement, investment attraction and global partnerships, and the current reviews which are underway, which are due for tabling at the committee in June for procurement and the parks and open spaces review. So we keep these terms of reference reasonably generic and broad because it allows the team to do a period of discovery to hone effectively the inquiry into areas where the greatest value in its broadest sense, that means obviously, following the 4 wellbeings value is not just simply cost efficiency, but for us to look and hone effectively our review into areas where we feel there are greatest value based on the facts that we discover in the current state evaluation. So these terms of reference are part of what's called if you recall, the organisational support component of the long-term plan budget grouping, and it's a very large, a large budget area. It basically includes communications and engagement, procurement, transactional services, finance, legal and human resources, and corporate property. The budget grouping on the whole represents around 4.2 billion in OPEX and 1.3 billion in CAPEX planned over the next 10 years, and has, in terms of both customer services and information, communications and technology, a strong potential group collaborative component, which we'll be looking at, the potential component when we're doing the review. So, as I've said, the scope of the reviews are broadly drafted to enable effectively this flexibility.
Thank you very much. Sally, are there first of all any questions from any councillors? If not, I'll move. Oh, sorry, Councillor Linda Cooper.
Do you think that this strikes the right balance between governance and management in terms of how far governance can reach down into something, and because I always get a bit concerned about undermining your CEO and your executive group in terms of what you're paying them for in the first place, that trust issues level and things like that. So do you think that's comparable anywhere else, or these are comparable? I know it's a different setup and we've got a different system, but we are supposed to run in a business-like way.
Yes, through the Chair. It's always a challenge for these reviews to find the right balance between a strategic rather than a tactical review that touches areas of management responsibility rather than essentially, if you like, shareholder or sort of corporate value opportunity. And it basically it requires us to focus in order to avoid basically lifting the veil, if you like, too much on matters of management responsibility. We look at mainly in these reviews the opportunities across the group under Section 17A, which includes those 3 components of service, funding and governance, as distinct from getting into detail operations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yeah, just got a question. So, is this review looking at ICT, that whole area?
Through the Chair, yes, it is.
And I know that we've gone down this path of using SAP and the like. So my question, looking in hindsight, is around whether or not opportunities for more open platform software and the like may have had merit. Is that sort of thing part of the scope of this report?
Yes, through the Chair. Our review of the future will look at essentially what technology strategy exists across the group, and how one of the questions we've got, specific questions, is how is it coping with this, if you like, disruptive technology that's moving increasingly into the cloud.
Okay, so through you, Mr. Chair, I'm very encouraged around that, because when an earlier council was engaged in this process, I raised that question consistently, and it may well be, particularly because of the disruptive technology and much more open source, open platform information available, that we need to go down that direction and be less trapped by some of the contractual obligations we've got.
Thank you. Take that as a comment rather than a question. Councillor Newman?
Yes, thank you, Sally. So the review that relates to group customer services management, the 17A review, 17A is about delivery of services. So, and within the group management, I'm assuming, so this will address all of the CCOs as part of this exercise?
Through the Chair, it does include all the CCOs, both substantive and non-substantive.
Okay, I have a discussion tomorrow with the Group Manager for Customer Services at Auckland Transport, which seeks to address what I think are significant customer service blind spots that have been affecting my ward. I wonder, with respect to the review methodology that's set out in Attachment A, you're looking at the current state assessment and the options assessment methodology. To what extent is this review able to address some of the wider systemic roadblocks within that particular CCO, whereby there is quite a good interface with the community that contact about concerns in their neighbourhood, relation to transport, concerns elected members raise with Auckland Transport through the elected member liaison. But beyond, and you have a good interface there, so the external face is quite good. But then the internal processes prevent a resolution because, of course, it's structured in a way whereby the solution isn't necessarily conducive to what the customer wants, but it's okay from a traffic engineer's perspective. How does that conundrum get addressed through, how do you even get to expose that through the review methodology that's been proposed?
So probably two things of note, Mr Chairman, in relation to the question, is basically looking at the way they measure customer performance is one of the things that we'll be particularly looking at, and there seems to be a bit of a divide in terms of our current work between customer satisfaction measurement and customer experience measurement. And customer experience measurement is, if you like, the new measurement focus in terms of public sector. So we'll be looking at those things and what they are doing there and how they're performing. And the second one is we are specifically looking at how complaints are being managed and processed and the resolution times for those complaints. So we're testing in relation to public sector best practices how complaints are resolved.
That's a very good answer. Thank you. That's quite enlightening. No further questions. Are there any comments that people want to make? I think it's reasonably straightforward. We've done these before. We're obliged to do them under statute, and there are huge benefits that we can gain from every dollar we spend wisely is a better result for the people we represent. No further comment on it. I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. Item number 13 is Ngāti Pawa, a treaty settlement redress. Councillors, you're aware that that comes under confidential, and this is simply to note
Happy to move,
that there is a confidential report, so I'll move that. Do I have a seconder on that? Seconded by Councillor Clow. No questions or comments. I'll put that recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. Item number 14 is a summary of information memos and briefings. I'll move the resolution that we receive the summary of the memos and briefings. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Simpson. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. I'll now move that we move into confidential session on the basis that the information we're about to discuss is subject to an obligation of confidentiality. It's information provided by the Crown to us in confidence on the understanding that the information is negotiation sensitive between the hapu or iwi concerned and the Crown. So do I have a seconder to move into confidentiality? Councillor Darby. I'll move accordingly. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. And could I ask anybody that is not required to be here on council business, please, to leave? I think that has happened already. So let's move directly into paper C1.